Well, it is 5 o'clock here in Eugene. That means we're live here at the Voice of College Football. John Evans here with me, Owen Murray. For the first time after an Oregon loss this season, Ducks dropped on Saturday 30-20 to the Indiana Hoosiers at Autzen Stadium, broke their FBS leading home winning streak, 18 games there for the Ducks. We've taken some time to look at the film, John. What do you want to say immediately?
All I have to say is, man, Indiana is a good football team. I came away from that game obviously disappointed in the way that Oregon played, but more so impressed by just what Indiana did. Kurt Cignetti is a phenomenal football coach. He showed that last year. He showed that at James Madison a couple of years ago, and he continues to elevate this program. But they got good players across all over the field. They had, I mean, we know about Mendoza. We talked about what Mendoza as a Heisman candidate and a potential first rounder next year on our show last week, but Elijah Surratt dominated. Their defensive line was really good. Aiden Fisher at linebacker. Indiana's a good football team, and they're going to do good things this year. Oregon has a lot to learn from this game, but now they'll have the opportunity to do that. So I'm not devastated by what went on Saturday in terms of I think things can still improve, and I think this team is still on track to be where they want to be at the end of the season. But you got to be able to learn from those mistakes. So it's about implementing it now at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about, hey, does the expectation change for this Ducks team now? And I think it does a little bit. You know, you see that this is a team that's not perfect and really it got out coached. Dan Lanning talked about it post game by a team that was obviously better than it. But you know, the expectation for this team is still a playoff berth and national championship contention. We just don't know that they're going to get the chance to prove it until later this season. Just to get a little bit into the AP top 25 here. Ducks fell to number 8, Indiana up to number 3 with 3 votes for number 1. So the Hoosiers getting a little bit of love there in the poll, and it's Miami and Ohio State above them. USC, though, only ranked team left on the Ducks schedule. They're up at number 20 after a big win over Michigan at the Coliseum. That game is November 22nd, I think, right before the Ducks head up to Seattle to face the Huskies' last game of the season. John, what does this top 25 look like? Is this what you're expecting?
Yeah, I think so. I think we thought the Ducks would drop. It's kind of been that the separation of the undefeated teams at this point versus the one-loss teams. They're now behind teams like Texas Tech. I mean, Alabama is ahead of them, but Alabama has had some wins to build that back up at this point in terms of their resume over teams like Georgia. So yeah, I think 8 is pretty fair for Oregon. And what I felt the most after this one in terms of, you know, expectations and things like that was that I think we're honestly just kind of back to where we were at the start of the season a little bit. I going into the year, I felt like this team was a year away. Like I thought the year 2 of the more and more connection would be where things really shined when they had that experience. Because we had talked also offseason about how young this team was, how much they were, and how much they've done it successfully this year, but relying on a lot of those first year, second year guys. I think the expectation has kind of fallen back to where it was at the beginning of the season, where this team might be a year away, but they're still going to be a very competitive team. And if things shake out, if they can make those improvements this season, they could certainly find themselves in that national championship conversation. But they're firmly in that playoff range, but I think a step behind what looks to be the top of the top in college football, which is at this point Indiana, but also Ohio State and like you said, Miami, those other top teams.
Yeah, I know a couple people mentioned it. I think Aiden Hess for KWVA. There's not a lot of these players who have lost as Oregon players, whether that's because they're freshmen or because they're transfers. This is a new experience for a lot of these players, and it means we get to see how they handle it. We got the opportunity to talk to Bryce Betcher and Dante Moore after the game. They were both pretty adamant that this is not their best game, and that I remember Bryce, I think it was Zach Neal's question. He's like, I'm going to go home. I'm going to watch the game. I'm going to talk to my family. Thank you for coming. And then I'm going to go to bed, get to the facility, and watch the game 3 or 4 more times. Dante, talked about the fact that he really didn't feel great about the way he managed the game, about how he managed looking at pressures, and I'm sure we'll get into talking about what went wrong there, kind of from a pressure perspective, and what Indiana did really well. This is not the best this team can play. Everybody knows that, and we'll see. It looks like they're going to have another chance to prove it against an AP top 25 team in the Trojans, but we have to keep an eye.
Yeah, I think I'm glad to see USC get into that top 25 just to have it on the Duck schedule and have a team to look forward to as a matchup down there. I mean, USC was good initially anyways, but to prove it against a team like Michigan, that's at least something Oregon can put on the schedule and say, hey, we got to get better because we do got a ranked team coming to Autzen to play us again. We saw what happened last time. That went down this past weekend. Not going to want to let that happen again. So just curious where your expectations have kind of fallen after this game. Not saying they've necessarily fallen, but where they kind of lie now, in terms of where that falls within. A lot of people I feel like have come off this team and said they're no longer that national championship team. They've cited the youth, like I was just saying. Where does it feel like for you, especially compared to that national kind of step back that people have seemed to have taken recently?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the weakness that we saw on Saturday was ones that we expected. We talked about, the linebackers are one of the weaker position groups on this team that went undrafted in our position draft. And that was really something we saw get exploited against the Hoosiers. They were really able to manipulate Bryce Betcher and Jerry Mixon. And we talked about that earlier in the week. The thing I maybe wasn't expecting is how much Oregon struggled to get the rushing game going. Indiana's defensive front was really, really strong in this game. Really able to push back, especially over right tackle where Alex Harkey, had a really tough game. And that meant that some of the Ducks' really explosive players, you look at De'Aaron Hill, he had -3 yards in this game. Indiana did a really great job of shutting down the Ducks' side-to-side motion, which is exactly what the Ducks did in the second half, or where the Ducks struggled against Penn State in the second half a couple weeks ago. Just Hoosiers came in and did to them. And that meant that the Ducks really weren't able to get that many explosives. You had the Davison one where he was able to break a couple tackles. I know you're excited. I'm excited to see him maybe get a little bit more run. Dan Lang talked about, that they were looking at that because they were kind of riding the hot hand and felt like he was really seeing the field well. I wasn't expecting Oregon to really struggle so much in the rushing game. That had been the Ducks' biggest strength, especially because they're so multiple at that position. Hoosiers were really able to really able to shut it down. And that's, I think, the biggest thing I want to see this weekend is can Oregon, it's not the same level of opposition. We'll start talking about Rutgers after the break here, but I want to see if that rushing game can pick itself up off the ground.
Yeah, speaking of that rushing game, I'll move it to the next segment here. Normally we go over two things that we had that excited us from that last game, and then one thing that was a question mark still going forward. We're going to switch it up a little bit and go with two things that we're questioning now after this last game, and one thing that we're still excited about. And Owen, you had that run game marked down as a thing that you're still questioning, especially after this game, because really in the second half, they just went away from it. It felt like they weren't trying to establish it as much as they were in the first half. You mentioned Davison in that first half. They had the hot hand a little bit. He was getting some regular. It was him. He was getting carries that weren't just the short yardage carries. They're giving it to him on first down. He ripped off one for 26 yards. He looked really good. He was for him. Exactly. I thought the cuts, the vision was nice from him. But when they tried to go outside with guys like Hill, Indiana was just ready for that. They knew Oregon's tendencies really well. They knew that when Hill and Davison are in the game together, they'll be ready for that run to the outside. And they played with three linebackers on the field a lot of the time, and their linebackers all three of them had phenomenal games. Fisher was a monster all over the field. Jones had the interception late. Oregon could not get much room in the front seven. They did a really good job containing them inside the tackles and forcing those runs up the middle so that Oregon couldn't get to the outside and start breaking those bigger explosive gains, because that didn't happen at all. Only one of them on the ground, when that's been something that Oregon's done so well this year, is those explosives on the ground. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that's because a guy like De'Aaron Hill can't get vertical on the outside. Just to give you some of the stats here, the Ducks made 81 yards on the ground. That there's -27 from the 6 sacks they took and -3 from the Hill carries that didn't go anywhere. The Ducks only had 2 rushers over 17 yards in this game. That's Davison, who had the couple explosive, and Noah Whittington, who got just in the mid-20s there, which really did limit the options when the Ducks are trying to mount a comeback in these drives and really just keep their offense on the field. The defense was on the field for a long period of this game. I think Indiana had the ball 7 minutes longer or so than the Ducks in this one, and that just meant that not only is the offense not getting opportunities to play, and Indiana is able to, because the Hoosiers got a lot of pressure with 4-man fronts here, or a pressure where they bring a linebacker and drop a lineman into coverage. But that means your defense is on the field in a place where it's struggling. These guys couldn't deal with Elijah Surratt. They couldn't deal with Omar Cooper Jr., and you're putting them back on the field time after time. And that all goes back to the run game, because that's what takes time off the clock. That's what lets you really establish a foothold in the game, and the Ducks really couldn't do it. And that became even more exasperated in the second half. Oregon it was 2/3 possession for Indiana. Oregon had less than 10 minutes of the ball in that second half. And especially because Oregon's only touchdown in that half came on a pick 6. So it was Indiana had the ball, Oregon scored, and then Oregon's defense went right back out there, and Indiana put together a big drive and controlled the clock. So Yeah, Dante, like in real time, it was say we were sitting there in the stadium and it was like we hadn't seen Dante Moore on the field for almost half an hour, and Oregon's defense was getting gassed, and they didn't have that juice at the end of the game to slow down Indiana when they were able to drive when they needed to put that game away.
Yeah, and Oregon's defense really doesn't have the guys to rotate the way you look at this offense and you say, hey, I really feel like the running back room is pretty deep. I feel like there's 4 or 5 solid options outside of Corey Moore, wide receiver. That's not really the thing on defense, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But it didn't feel like there were guys that could rotate to keep this defense, able to play and able to try to keep up with some of these receivers that were just outrunning them every play.
Yeah, the Indiana's receivers are just they're good players. They're really good players, and it was hard to keep up for the Ducks down the stretch there. For me, the first thing that like you said, just the pressure that Indiana was able to put on Dante, that was the thing that I came away questioning. Dante Moore had not been blitzed very much going into this. It was running a blitz rate below where teams were sending at Dylan Gabriel and Bo Nix for this Will Stein offense in the last couple of years. I saw that as something initially. Teams didn't want to blitz him because they were afraid of how quickly he was getting rid of the ball, but they sent pressure at him all game, blitzed on over 40% of his dropbacks, and even when they weren't blitzing, would, like you said, send those extra guys, and Dante was not seeing things correctly. And not setting his protections. He just didn't really. It was the first time that he looked like the kid that was at UCLA a couple years ago, where he was under pressure all the time, was making those mistakes. He just looked a little bit overwhelmed out there on Saturday, and I credit Cignetti's defense more than anything with that and the scheme that they had. They were very ready for everything Oregon wants to do. There were times even where Oregon would get like the two core they get like 2 receivers stacked to the boundary like they do with like a single corner and a safety over there. They see that as numbers and are like, okay, well, let's throw that screen pass out there. But because Indiana would do those sim blitzes and stuff, all of a sudden they got an edge dropping back that way, and he's immediately there to limit that screen pass for 2 yards. So Dante Moore was just not really comprehending what Indiana was doing to him. So you just got to look for that to improve.
I want to take a minute to just talk about this comment here. Because I have some thoughts about it. I want to see what you thought about it. 2 interceptions and 3 offensive play. I think it was back-to-back, actually.
It was back-to-back,
late in the game didn't help either. How much do you think those interceptions impacted the game? How much were they garbage time?
I mean, they obviously sealed it. The second one I felt was a little more garbage timey, but the first one absolutely sealed that. That was a drive that Oregon was down 7 at that point, so they had a chance to go get that. Indiana runs a twist and gets pressure in Dante's face, and he tries to get rid of it quickly on an RPO, and it gets tipped up for a pick. So it just comes down to the pressure that he was facing. Again, the second one, he gets his base hit by Poncho getting pushed back into him. And I mean, he's throwing a throw he probably shouldn't have made, but it's made even worse when it doesn't come out of his hand well because his base is not great. So those absolutely did affect the game, very much sealed things off for Indiana, especially that first one when Oregon did have a chance to go and tie it on that drive.
Yeah, I mean, I just remember looking at the tape there, and I'd say, like, yes, this is a bad throw. I don't know where else he's going. There's not really any options, and he's getting rushed so quickly, and he feels like he's getting rushed so quickly. It felt like we talked about how like cool he looked in the pocket and how he was able to really stand in there and make throws under pressure. It didn't look like that in this game, and it's because he had been feeling the heat all the time.
There were a couple of times where he got a ball out cleanly to Gary Bryant at one point.
There was those back-to-back ones with throwing hot that looked really good
on that drive too. But yeah, he had a couple of times where he was able to do it, but it just wasn't consistent. And I think at a certain point, it got into his head, and then he was thinking a blitz was going to come, and then it didn't. He wasn't looking at a guy that maybe would have been open or something like that. Indiana coached that game really well. They had a better plan than Oregon did offensively, and I was surprised by Oregon's inability to counter in that game. That was the biggest thing. Indiana had answers for what Oregon likes to do, and Oregon didn't have a counter and an adjustment to those things. So that's the biggest thing that's got to change going forward.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to get back into those corners, and it felt like outside of Brandon Finney, who I know you'll get into, these corners really struggled, and we talked about how good Surratt is, how good Omar Cooper is, but the fact that they were rotating these guys so early, we saw a lot of Theron Johnson, we saw a lot of Sione Lalea, and it really felt like none of them could get a foothold in this game, especially in the first half. Ife Obadegu had that drive where he was called for 2 pass interference calls. One of them was away from the ball right in the middle of the field when Jaden Candy actually makes a really good play, and then the other ones in the end zone, sets the Hoosiers up, right on the goal mouth, and they punch it in. We talked about how good these corners were, and I was really surprised to see them rotated so early. But they're obviously struggling, and then to see a guy who we've talked about so highly, if Ifeobadegu, really struggle. What do you see from those guys? We'll save Finney for later.
Surratt was just he's such a good receiver, man. He was able, just the way he's able to separate from these guys, not just the winning at the catch point, but being able to separate on those routes, snapping them off back and getting back towards Mendoza on those comeback routes. And Oregon just wasn't ready for it, playing that off coverage most of the time. So yeah, you just got to find consistent answers there, because there was rotation, but they couldn't figure out anything that was going to work against that guy. They started with Johnson on him, and then they went to Ifeobadegu on him, and nothing was working there. I would have liked to see at some point maybe just sticking Brandon Finney on him and letting him follow Surratt around the field, trying to just one-on-one use your, maybe what seems to be your best corner, your best athlete out there on their best receiver. But Oregon tends to just play sides at corners and stuck to that most of the game. And they were able to, I mean, Surratt only got matched. He only got targeted twice against Finney. He did most of his damage against those other cornerbacks.
Yeah. And then, we talked about how good they are. Do you feel like, this is just they ran into a really talented guy? We still feel like they're pretty solid corners, or is this like real cause for concern outside of Finney?
I don't think it's necessarily super cause for concern, because not most teams don't have receivers that are as good as Elijah Surratt. But when you are in that college football playoff scenario, yeah, you're gonna face the top receivers in the country. So you want to get that figured out and figure out who your number 2 guy is behind Finney, because I think you're gonna want to have just a solidified 1-2 out there instead of rotating and hoping you can find that matchup.
Yeah, I'm gonna lead into your next one with this comment. Take it away.
I mean, yeah, that's the other thing, that just the way that this team was outcoached. Like I said previously, just Oregon had a better game, or Indiana had a better game plan than Oregon. Dan Lanning said it afterwards. They were better prepared. Mentally, they were better prepared to just go out there and win that game, it seemed like. So I think that's Oregon just got to find solutions on that side with the coaching staff and figure out I think they have the right guys, but can those guys make the adjustments that they need to make? And can Dan Lanning get that all organized? I think it can happen, but we got to see it now, because you got opportunity to do it throughout the rest of the year.
Yeah. And then Birdie here said, it happens, but it's not something we've seen happen very often. On Saturday, we said, hey, I don't know if the Ducks have really been smoked like this in the regular season since that first game against Georgia. And it's obviously, we're not lighting the fire. Dan Lanning is not the guy. He is still the guy, Oregon fans. But you look at it and say, hey, like, this is really something that you say this is a learning moment, and you want to take a real look at yourself, because it's not that many times that Oregon does get outcoached. These guys are some of the best in the country, and when they do get if somebody rolls in who's better than them for a game, you really do want to look at that, and that's why we're spending so much time on this.
Yeah, we've talked about how good Lanning has been from being able to get his team to learn from wins this season. So now it's time to learn from a loss. So be able to, it's going to be like Dante Moore said afterwards, just going to the doctor this week and watching the film, making those adjustments. I think it's going to be a lot of walkthrough, a lot of game plan scheme stuff, more so than we're just not strong enough, because I think that wasn't necessarily the problem on Saturday.
Yeah, well, get into the good things we saw. This is a really important learning moment, like I said, for the Ducks. And it's like still do have opportunities to rebound, still in playoff contention. This, the Ducks are really good at learning from wins, but sometimes it's tough when you're playing really good football all the time to see your flaws. And the Ducks do a good job of identifying those. This is a game where you get to see all of them. Not all of them, but a ton of them. This is a game where Oregon did not protect the quarterback well, did not pressure the passer well, did not play great defense in the secondary, and you have a lot of tape now to look at stuff that you didn't do well at, and some chances to bounce back from that. You get a really softer game against Rutgers this weekend, but a long road trip, and then you do get some games. You go to Kinnick, you go host USC, and then you go play at Washington. They're still in playoff contention. That's the beauty of the new era of college football, but they don't control their path to the Big Ten championship game anymore. They'll need one of Indiana or preferably Ohio State, because they don't have a tiebreaker over them than that one, to lose, one of the remaining undefeateds in the Big Ten. This is just to come back to it, a really important moment for this team, because they're so young, and this is a chance they get to learn from a ton of mistakes they made.
Yeah, like you said, in this 12-team playoff era we're in now, we saw it last year. Ohio State lost it to a Michigan team that was middling and struggling at the end of last season, and was able to correct things within that time before they played Tennessee in the playoff, and then ultimately rolled the Oregon in the Rose Bowl on their way to a national championship, make adjustments, and come back better and hungrier. So Oregon has an opportunity to do that. It's time now. So make those adjustments. Go to the doctor and fix those things in practice, and be ready, because you're gonna have time. Like we've been saying, you got plenty of opportunity, plenty of time to go fix this down the stretch. Because that's the benefit of this happening too in early October. I've seen some people say even that they're kind of glad that Oregon lost the game at this point, because last year, going undefeated all season, winning the Big Ten title the game, you go into that Rose Bowl and get just stomped out of the gates by Ohio State. And people feeling like there was a certain like a sense of complacency almost because of that undefeated season, where they weren't ready when it came to that point. They hadn't been challenged yet. So I think there could be some benefit there from having a loss early like this, being able to learn from it, grow from it, and it happening at a point. It's week 7. You got plenty of season left. You got up to 2 months before it's playoff time, and you got to really hammer things down.
All right, let's talk about the best duck on the field, John.
Yeah, this is the breakout game for Brandon Finney. He's been a stud for the Ducks all year, and has people have been talking about him. He got some attention going into this game. I saw like he was I retweeted like a PFF college thing, because he was like some of the best coverage stats in college football this year going into this week, and he continued to do that. 4 targets, only 1 reception for 13 yards, and then obviously has the big moment in the fourth quarter with the pick 6. But I mean, that was just a phenomenal play by him, and Lanning said it afterwards as well. Those crossing routes, playing those in man coverage, super hard to do, and to be able to run with a receiver across the field, but then undercut it and make a play on it and take it all the way back to the house. Brandon Finney is a special player for the Ducks. He's a true freshman, and I'm excited to see what he continues to do throughout the rest of this year. I would have just maybe liked to see him move around the field with Elijah Surratt at some point in that game, because he seemed to be like he might have been the best option. Had a target that he broke up that was not a PI. Could have been maybe.
Yeah, it could have been. Yeah.
On some certain perspectives, but I think that was at least just the physical matchup was the best that the Ducks could have done. So I would have liked to seen that a little more. And maybe if you do get into situations against a guy like Jeremiah Smith, let Brandon Finney just try to match up with him.
Yeah, well, that's why they go out and get these big guys. Kurt Signetti definitely thought that one was a pass interference. We remember that one. Yeah, and you don't have to wait until the college football playoff for the Ducks to face some great receivers. You look at the Trojans and the Huskies, and they've got some really great ones. You look at Mekhi Lemon. Denzel Boston is probably a top 5, top 10 guy in the country up in Seattle. There's going to be opportunities to see Brandon Finney against some of the better receivers in the country here, and I'm really curious, to see what they do with him, because he's so phenomenal. He's so athletic, and we've talked a lot about how the Ducks really did go out and get some bigger guys to be able to play against the the receivers who are 6'3", 6'4", and did bully the Ducks DBs a little bit in the Rose Bowl. This is what they got a guy like that for, and it is the silver lining here. You really see, like you said, a breakout game for a guy again who's a true freshman, been able to come in here and be phenomenal through 6 games. Even if the Ducks did lose that one, he was really, really strong.
Definitely.
All right, well, we're gonna send you all to the break here really quick. When we come back, talk about this Rutgers game, see what we got coming for the Ducks.
College football is even more exciting when you've got some action on the line, and the games are even better when you're cashing in. And the Voice of College Football is the place to be to get the greatest value. Start with my picks. 75% against the money line, 58% against the spread, and I've got a 40-plus year track record. 11-0 in the college football playoff for me last year against the money line, 8-3 against the spread. And I'm just the warm-up act. Steve Merrill of Wager Talk is our ace in the hole, show stopper. 7 years with the Voice of College Football, over 30 years in the industry. Steve gives us analysis on all the big games, but you can't miss Steve's weekly under-the-radar pick. 28-12 against the spread the last 3 years. You also get picks from some of our top analysts here at the Voice of College Football, including Corey Bratta, Matt Zemek, and Steve Dace. Check out those numbers. Become a YouTube or Patreon member for just $99 per month. Go to the main channel on YouTube, click join, and then select the betting tier. Do the same thing on Patreon. Make 2025 a winner now.
All right, welcome back to Oregon Live at the Voice of College Football, where we just finished reviewing the Indiana game. You can check that out either back in this recording or later this week on our YouTube channel. But for now, John, we're going to get into Oregon Rutgers this Saturday, October 18th, 3:30 Pacific time. Really nice time for the Ducks on Big Ten Network. Heading to Piscataway here. Rutgers 3-3 on the year, but 0-3 in the Big Ten. Some high scoring losses here. Iowa at Minnesota, at Washington. What are you seeing from the Scarlet Knights?
Yeah, this is a team that has struggled defensively this year and has led to some high-powered numbers on offense. Calic Manis is back at quarterback for them again this season after a solid year last year statistically. He's in the top 10 passing in the country. Antoine Raymond is at 9 touchdowns, tied for second in the country on the year. So they have guys that can get things done offensively, but this is a game that Oregon should comfortably win by multiple scores, and that should absolutely be the expectation, especially after this Indiana game. Oregon should be looking to go out there and prove that they are still a top 10 team and not a team, because right now the resume does not look strong. Penn State lost again last weekend. Drew Aller now out for the year, so that continues. What had been Oregon's best win now looks less and less good. So Oregon needs every game they can get at this point. You got to stack just quantity wins, because you're not going to have as many of those quality wins until you get into USC and Washington at the end of the year. But this is a team that's going to potentially test the secondary, especially. They got some big guys. Ian Strong, KJ Duff are number 1 and number 2 in the country in contested catches this season, because they just like to Calic Manis can throw it up to those guys. Duff is 6'6", 225. It's a huge guy at receiver. I think Strong's about 6'3" or so. So they got 2 big guys. So it's going to be a similar test, somewhat to Surratt. I don't think those guys probably move as well as Surratt does, but a test for your corners in terms of being challenged by some physical guys who are going to go try to win one-on-one balls again.
Yeah, and then you talk about how good this Rutgers team looks on offense. They've been on the field trailing a lot in these games. They put up 28, 28, and 19, really chasing games against the Hawkeyes, the Golden Gophers, and the Huskies here. They look pretty solid, but it's because they're throwing a lot late in games trying to get back here. And so really, what I'm looking for the Ducks in this game is just that let's keep the offense on the field. Let's show that this running game can really find a foothold in the way that it didn't against Indiana. And even though you can't come out of this game saying, hey, I really feel solid about us being able to go beat a team like Indiana, even if they beat the brakes off Rutgers, that's what I want to look. I believe you can't fix all the issues in this game, but you can come out of here feeling way better about yourself on a game that it isn't, like we said before the break, is not necessarily a tough game when you look at how these teams stack up, but it's a long way away. Coming off a tough week for the Ducks, this is a get-right game for Oregon.
Yeah, Damon Williams had over 530 yards and 4 touchdowns last week, like of total offense against this team on pretty crazy efficiency. So I think this is a good chance, especially. So nuts, bro. Yeah, I think this is a good chance, especially when you're coming off a game where you really did struggle offensively, to be that get-right game, that bounce-back game. And kind of be a confidence builder again for Dante Moore in this offense, because you should be able to torch. I don't think they should be trying to necessarily torch them and throw a bunch of deep balls, but I think you definitely could do that to this Rutgers team. But I think you should be able to operate really cleanly through the offense, hit all the stuff underneath and work the ball down the field and just build that confidence back up in Dante Moore. And in terms of feeling good about his reads, good about his protections and all that stuff, that was the struggle against Indiana. Yeah,
and absolutely. Bryce Brady in the comments saying linebacker play needs to improve. What does that look like for you in this game? How do you see Bryce Betcher and we assume Jerry Mixon? How do they get right in this one?
There were times in that Indiana game where they just didn't take the angles they necessarily needed to on some of those run plays. So those things are always things that linebackers need to work on, but obviously that continues to need to improve. I think in coverage, if Mendoza did such a good job at manipulating those guys sometimes underneath and be able to hit some short routes, he didn't do a ton. I mean, he obviously had all the stuff he was doing to Surratt, but it wasn't like he was stretching the field vertically a ton against this Oregon team. But he was good at operating underneath and be able to push the move the offense down the field. That's the things that Cali McManus isn't necessarily going to be able to do as well for Rutgers. So that should be something that improves, just playing against a not as talented and capable quarterback. But yeah, definitely got to be able to guard those routes underneath, because Indiana was able to consistently hit those and be able to set themselves up for easy conversions by like hitting their tight end and then being able to run for a couple of yards, or be able to convert those passes to guys like Omar Cooper, who had a great game against Jaden Kennedy.
Yeah, and we did talk about how much this team has played from behind, but like you mentioned, Antoine Raymond, tied second in the country, 9 touchdowns, top 20 in rushing yards. It really felt like the rushing game wasn't what killed Oregon in this game. It was Surratt, but Indiana certainly didn't struggle to run the ball. They have that RPO game that was really solid. What do they need to do? We felt like Amari Washington, Bear Alexander had pretty solid games. They've been pretty solid since that Penn State game. Is that something you're really focused on in this game? Do you feel like they're actually going to struggle with Raymond?
I don't think I think Indiana's offensive line is definitely better than Rutgers is. There were times where Amari Washington or Bear Alexander were able to just overpower those guys on the Indiana offensive line, but they played really well for the most part, and they kept from Fernando Mendoza clean. They gave good rushing lanes to Indiana's running back. So I think it's less about those guys up front, because I think they did do a pretty good job at eating some of those double teams and working stuff. I think it's got to come from the linebackers being able to fill those gaps properly. For the safeties from the second level, Aaron Flowers had a couple of missed tackles. He's a guy that just crashes so hard that he does miss at times. He's a young guy. You just got to slow down a little bit. These young guys want to just, especially at safety, you're just flying all over the field. You got to take a second to just, read things out a little bit more and make sure you're filling the correct gaps from that second level, so that these guys can't get those 7, 8, 9 yard gains on the ground.
Yeah, I remember tweeting about Flowers during the game, because when he does make those hits, man, they look good. Like when that kid comes downhill, you're saying like, yes, this is what we want to see. He does really well rotating down when the Ducks go into like a single high shell and leave Thieneman up there alone, or leave a guy like Lopa. I've been largely impressed with what Flowers can do, especially he feels like he is really learning from a guy like Thieneman. This is the next step we want to see him take. Hey, let's be a little bit more measured. Let's start looking like a veteran, because there's a lot of guys on this team. We talk about what makes the freshmen on this team so successful. Brandon Finney feels like a vet. Some of these guys, DeCorey Moore already feels like a guy, especially when he's talking. We hear him talk to the media. He already feels like a guy who's been talking to him for 3 or 4 years.
I mean, as a big recruit as he was in Texas high school football, he has been talking to media for a while.
Yeah, and so that is the next step we want to see a guy like Flowers take, because he's been really solid next to Thieneman. But as they get further in this postseason, I like what you brought up. Let's just see him slow it down a little bit.
Yeah, this Rutgers team is it's going to be definitely, I think the biggest thing is that get back game, that get right game, especially offensively. Just get an opportunity to operate things the way they're supposed to, and because you're not going to be under pressure necessarily the whole time. I think there is a chance that Rutgers does see what Indiana did, and it tries to scheme some of that up. But I don't think I don't know if their coaching staff is going to necessarily do that as well as Indiana's was. And hopefully at this point, Dante Moore in Oregon has had a week of practice looking at those things and trying to identify where extra rushers are coming from and stuff like that, so you can set protections correctly. Because it just felt like so many of the times in this Indiana game, the line would just slide the way that away from the blitz instead of towards the blitz, because they would just bring it from a place that Dante Moore wasn't ready for.
Yeah, I would want to take a second here. We have talked about this Rutgers game. Let's just look a little bit at the rest of this regular season. What do you see as the biggest moments for these Ducks? What are the flashpoints?
Obviously, the inflection point now is that home game against USC. I think this Iowa game could be interesting in terms of going at Iowa. It's going to be a cold weather game, likely in traditional Big Ten territory. But the other one for me is Washington, especially at the end of the season. We just talked about how good Damon Williams has been this year. Denzel Boston, Joda Coleman is one of the best running backs in the country. Their defense is solid, not as good as their offense for sure. They're going to put up offensive numbers, but Husky Stadium has been a place that Dan Lanning has not necessarily succeeded a ton throughout his. Well, no, he's 0 for 1 there. So yeah, so no success because of Camden Lewis, unfortunately for Dan. But so going into that stadium, it's loud. They have a great environment up there on the lake, and it's going to be a team that will challenge you offensively for sure. So that will be a fun one at the end of the year as well.
Yeah, I'm really excited, honestly, to see, because you took a look at some of these games early in the season, you say, I don't know if there's going to be some tests after that Indiana one, and you really say, yeah, like is there something here for the Ducks to prove it after, especially because that does end up mattering so much when you look at poll rankings and especially the Ducks end up out of the Big Ten championship game picture and not playing a conference championship. They do have a couple of really important games. You can kind of look at it and compare some to last season. That Iowa game starts to feel like Wisconsin, where you say, hey, it's going to be cold. This is going to be a tough game against a really solid defensive team. But this Hawkeye team feels like it can put up a lot more points than that Wisconsin team did last year, especially, missing Tyler Van Dyke at that point in the season. They put up 38 on Rutgers. Looked really solid in a couple of these games. Gave Iowa State a game earlier this year. And then you start looking at something like that. And we were talking earlier in this show about Ohio State and how they were able to get back in the picture after that. But what that included was a loss to Michigan. Do you feel like the Ducks could? Let's project here and say the Ducks went out and then end up losing to Washington. Are they still in the playoff picture at that point? Does precedent mean they have to be in the playoff picture even with 2 losses?
I don't think there's any precedent at this point, precedent is what it is. It is what it is because it's being made up every year at this point in ever evolving playoff formats. But a loss to Washington would certainly hurt. I think just because of, you get that win against USC. That's a good win, but because of where Oregon's resume is going to be at with the loss to Indiana, the Penn State win isn't going to look as good as it does. You're not going to have many other top teams. I think it's very important for the Ducks to, win out the rest of the season to show that they are very much deserving of that college football playoff spot. Just not even necessarily this weekend, but just going forward. This weekend as well. But what are those things that you want to see from Oregon to show that they're making that improvement and learning from those mistakes that they had in that Indiana game?
Yeah, we've talked a lot about what the Ducks really did struggle with in this game, and that's primarily what you want to see. You want to see the running game just run guys over. You want to see them go back to how multiple they were. You want to see Deer Hill be able to come in the game and then be able to hit guys in the face with Jordan Davison and Noah Whittington and have Jaden Lamar be able to be successful. It really felt like, not only were the main guys not successful in this game, not only did Deer Hill have negative yards, but nobody could get going, and that's not something the Ducks have really seen this year. They're going to play good run defenses. And you really want to see them be able to step up. And the biggest thing for me is being multiple from that running back position, because that's one of the Ducks' biggest strengths on offense is the variety of skill that they have. And then just the other thing is we've talked about the receivers they're going to play. I want to see guys outside of Brandon Finney step up. We talked about we projected before the season that Theron Johnson was going to be one of the starting corners. And he ended up not being. Got burned on the first right out of the game by Elijah Surratt. I want to see if he can step up. I'm really excited to see Jaden Candy had a couple nice plays. One of them was the pass deflection on third down that ended up being an Ife Abadegu pass interference. But he's looked really solid this year. I want to see those guys step up. I really, the depth becomes way more important down the stretch. Oregon hasn't faced too many injury worries yet this year, but the fact of a longer college football season is that there's more chances for guys to get banged up. They're not playing at 100% in November and December. The depth and the running back room is really what I want to see. How about you?
Yeah, we just found out last week that Kyler Casper is now going to be out for the year at receiver. So they continue to deal with some issues there, especially with the receiver position has been tough because Evan Stewart's obviously been down. Dylan Gresham's been down all year as well. But they are getting some guys back. It looks like hopefully too, especially like on defense. Dorian Brew was getting ready for that game. Another one of these freshman quarterbacks. I don't know how much we're necessarily going to see him, but Dalen Austin also didn't play in that one, but was prepping like he might have. So they could be getting some of these guys back at some point. But
I notably we saw Justice Lowe off the injury report this week too, so he
was out there on the field earlier in that game than I remembered seeing. I thought it was interesting to see that how much Malik Benson kind of fell out of favor in that game after catching that early touchdown because he broke free. It was the exact same play as do you remember the Dylan deep shot to Tez last year at UCLA?
Yes. Yep.
It was the exact same play as that one where it's a fake QB sweep and then he just stops back and drops it over the top on Dagger. But they stretched it out with that and they just barely went to Malik Benson. Jeremiah McClellan outsnapped him a ton. And I know they like McClellan as a blocker a lot and used him a bunch as a blocker in this game. But without Benson on the field, you don't have that field stretching threat as much because you want to use Decory and more of a just get him the ball, be your X receiver, than use him to stretch the field and just be that threat downfield. So I wish we had seen a little bit more of that because it felt like it wasn't working. The thing I want to see is just being able to make those in-game adjustments, have those counters, have those answers when you are challenged in some of these games, because even if it will happen less against lesser teams throughout the rest of the year, you are going to have moments where teams challenge you, throw things at you that you're not expecting, and can you adjust? Because that's been the thing that has been the downfall of Dan Lanning's teams at Oregon in terms of the game the other day and not having answers for Indiana. But that was what spelled their downfall against Washington a couple times in 2023, was not being able to adjust to Penix and those receivers and have another type of answer for that. So it's going to be just, can you have those counters throughout the year? Can you have something that'll be an answer that wasn't in the initial game plan necessarily?
Yeah. All right. Well, we're fired up. John is not going to be with me for the Rutgers game recap on Saturday, but we will have a show. I'll be around. We'll see if we can find some people to come hang with us, break down that one. We're excited, and we'll have another show that next Monday. And then we're, just appreciative of everybody who's hanging out here. We had a great comment section today. John, we'll see you in a little bit.
Yeah, well, I'll see you over at Dan's press conference here in a second. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching.